a warrior monk kneeling in a chapel carved from living rock, his white mantle stained with dust and blood. Above him, carved into ancient stone, an angel descends not with harps and halos, but with chains and keys. Its face bears no mercy, only the terrible weight of divine purpose. And beneath that angel, etched in letters older than memory, a single word that would make even the bravest Templar whisper prayers into the darkness. Abaddon. You think you know the Knights Templar, the crusading warriors, the guardians of pilgrims, the keepers of Christian orthodoxy. But what if everything you believed about them was just the surface? What if beneath their vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience lay something far more dangerous? A knowledge so forbidden that it threatened not just kingdoms, but the very foundations of heaven and earth itself. The year was 1119. 9 knights, led by Hugh de Payens, approached King Baldwin II of Jerusalem with a simple request. "Let us protect the pilgrims," they said. "Let us guard the roads to the holy city." But they didn't station themselves along dangerous mountain passes or at vulnerable river crossings. Instead, they took up residence on the Temple Mount, directly above what had once been Solomon's sacred temple. And then, for nearly a decade, they began to dig. What were they searching for beneath those ancient stones? Most believe it was treasure, gold and silver to fund their growing order. Others whisper of sacred relics, the Ark of the Covenant, or fragments of the true cross. But there are darker theories, older whispers that speak of something else entirely, something that should have remained buried in the depths of the earth until the end of days. The angel Abaddon appears only once in Scripture, in the book of Revelation. He is the angel of the bottomless pit, the destroyer, the one who holds the key to the abyss itself. When the 5th trumpet sounds and the end times begin, it is Abaddon who will unlock the gates of hell and release horrors beyond human comprehension. But here's what the church doesn't tell you. Here's what they buried in footnotes and whispered only in the deepest vaults of the Vatican. Abaddon wasn't just a prophecy, he was a presence. The Templars discovered something beneath the Temple Mount, something that changed them forever. After their decade of excavation, they emerged not as simple warrior monks, but as the most powerful and mysterious order in Christendom. They built castles that defied architectural logic, created banking systems that spanned continents, and developed rituals so secret that even today, centuries after their destruction, we can only guess at their true meaning. But power always comes with a price, and the price the Templars paid was written in symbols they carved into stone, whispered in confessions extracted under torture, and hidden in documents that vanished into Vatican archives never to be seen again. Because what they found beneath Jerusalem wasn't just treasure or relics, it was knowledge. Knowledge of angels that were never meant to serve heaven. Knowledge of keys that were never meant to be turned. Knowledge of an abyss that was never meant to be opened. Let me take you back to that excavation site. Picture the Temple Mount in the early 12th century. The Golden Dome hasn't yet been built. The Al-Aqsa Mosque stands where Solomon's temple once reached toward heaven, but beneath it, older foundations remain. Massive stones cut with precision that defies medieval tools, chambers that echo with whispers from another age, and carved into the deepest walls, symbols that don't belong to any Christian, Jewish, or Islamic tradition. The Templars spent 9 years down there, 9 years of torchlight and shadow, of pickaxes striking stone and rope hauling debris to the surface. Their official chronicles speak of renovation, of making suitable quarters for their small brotherhood. But renovation doesn't require that kind of time, that kind of secrecy, that kind of systematic excavation that left tunnels stretching deep beneath the mount. What they found changed everything, not just for them, but for the entire structure of medieval power. When they finally emerged, they weren't just 9 poor knights anymore. They were the bearers of something that made kings bow and popes tremble. Within decades, they controlled more wealth than most kingdoms. They answered to no earthly authority save the Pope himself, and their initiation rituals, when whispered accounts finally surfaced, spoke of knowledge that could damn a man's soul or elevate him beyond mortal understanding. But here's where the story takes its darkest turn. Because among the treasures they claim to have discovered, among the scrolls and artifacts they brought to light, was something that shouldn't have existed. A gospel, some say. Others claim it was a grimoire, a book of angelic magic. But the most persistent whispers speak of something else entirely. A key. Not made of metal or wood, but of knowledge itself. The key to the bottomless pit. The key that belonged to Abaddon. Now, before you dismiss this as medieval fantasy, consider what we know. The Templars developed an obsession with sacred geometry that went far beyond architectural necessity. Their buildings incorporated mathematical principles that wouldn't be rediscovered by mainstream scholars for centuries. They created symbols that appeared nowhere else in Christian art, but bore striking resemblances to angelic seals found in much older traditions. And their hierarchy included degrees of initiation that promised knowledge of celestial mechanics, of the true names of angels, of powers that could reshape reality itself. The church grew suspicious. How could 9 simple knights amass such wealth, such influence, such seemingly supernatural knowledge? The answer, when it finally came to light, was more terrifying than anyone had imagined, because the Templars hadn't just found treasure beneath the Temple Mount. They had found a presence, an angel bound in chains, waiting in the darkness for someone brave enough or foolish enough to turn the key and set him free. And that angel had a name, Abaddon, the destroyer, the angel of the abyss, the one whose very existence threatened to unravel the careful balance between heaven, earth, and hell. The church had spent centuries teaching that angels were messengers of God, beings of pure light and divine will. But the Templars discovered something different. They found an angel who served neither God nor Satan, but something older, something that existed before the division between good and evil had even been conceived. This discovery would ultimately lead to their destruction. But before we reach that bloody end, we need to understand what they actually found. We need to descend into those tunnels ourselves, to feel the weight of ancient stone above our heads, and the whisper of something inhuman in the darkness. Because the story of the Knights Templar and the Angel Called Abaddon isn't just medieval history, it's a key to understanding powers that still move in the shadows of our world today. The tunnels beneath the Temple Mount aren't like the neat archaeological sites you see in documentaries. They're rough, claustrophobic passages carved through bedrock by men who knew they were racing against time and suspicion. The air down there doesn't move. It sits heavy and thick, carrying the scent of stone dust and something else, something that makes your skin crawl even when you can't name it. When the Templars first broke through into the deepest chamber, they found walls covered in symbols that predated every known script. Not Hebrew, not Greek, not Latin, but something that seemed to writhe in the torchlight, as if the carved lines were alive. And at the center of that chamber, set into the floor itself, was a stone seal bearing the image we mentioned before. An angel with chains instead of wings, holding a key that seemed to pulse with its own dark light. The first knight to touch that seal was Jean de Montdidier. The chronicles, what few survive, describe what happened next in terms that still make scholars uncomfortable. The stone grew warm beneath his palm, the chamber filled with a sound like distant thunder, but coming from below, not above. And Jean himself, according to his brothers, began to speak in languages that had never been heard by human ears. He spoke the true names of angels, the hidden mathematics of creation, the words that could bind or loose powers that dwelt in the spaces between heaven and hell. But Jean paid a price for that knowledge. Within days, his hair had turned white. His eyes, once brown, became the pale blue of winter ice. And when he looked at his fellow knights, they said he saw not their faces, but their souls laid bare, every sin and secret written in letters of fire across their foreheads. He had touched something that was never meant for mortal hands, and it had marked him forever. Yet the knowledge he gained was intoxicating. Jean could predict battles before they were fought. He could find water in the deepest desert. He could speak to horses and make them understand complex military maneuvers. And most unsettling of all, he could see death approaching, not just his own, but anyone who stood within his presence. The other Templars began to whisper that Jean de Montdidier had made a bargain with something that lived in the abyss. They weren't entirely wrong, because the Angel Abaddon, the destroyer bound in chains, had been waiting in that chamber for over 2,000 years. Not sleeping, not dreaming, but watching. Watching the rise and fall of empires above his prison. Watching the birth of religions that tried to explain his existence. Watching for the moment when someone would finally have the courage and the foolishness to break the seals that held him. The Templars didn't free Abaddon. They weren't that reckless. But they did something almost as dangerous. They learned to communicate with him. Through ritual and symbol, through blood and fire, they opened a dialogue with a being whose knowledge spanned the entire history of creation. And Abaddon, patient as only immortal beings can be, began to teach them. He showed them how to forge steel that would never dull, never break. He revealed the secret names of kings and the hidden weaknesses of their enemies. He taught them to read the movements of gold and silver across continents, to predict where wealth would flow and how to position themselves to capture it. Most importantly, he showed them how to recognize others like themselves, mortals who had touched the divine and been forever changed by the encounter. This is how the Templars built their network, not through political alliance or military conquest, but through a kind of spiritual recognition. They could sense, in the span of a heartbeat, whether a man carried the mark of otherworldly knowledge. They recruited not just warriors and priests, but scholars, merchants, craftsmen, anyone who had glimpsed the machinery that runs beneath the surface of reality. But every gift from Abaddon came with conditions. The Angel of the Abyss demanded worship, not in the form of prayer or sacrifice, but in the form of action. The Templars were to gather knowledge, yes, but they were also to preserve it, to hide it from those who would use it wrongly, to wait for the proper time when the seals could be safely broken and the ancient powers released back into the world. This created a terrible tension within the order. On one hand, they were Christian knights sworn to protect pilgrims and defend the Holy Land. On the other, they were servants of an angel whose very existence challenged everything the Church taught about the nature of divine authority. They walked a razor's edge between salvation and damnation, never knowing which side would claim them when the final accounting came. The rituals they developed reflected this duality. New initiates underwent ceremonies that began with traditional Christian prayers, but ended with invocations in the angelic language Jean de Montdidier had learned in that underground chamber. They swore oaths not just to Christ and the Church, but to powers that had no names in any human tongue. And they learned to see the world through eyes that perceived both the glory of heaven and the terrible beauty of the abyss. This knowledge made them invaluable to kings and popes, but it also made them incredibly dangerous, because men who serve two masters eventually face a moment when they must choose between them, and that moment was coming faster than any of them realized. So what became of the Knights Templar and their terrible secret? History tells us they were arrested on Friday the 13th, 1307, tortured into confessions of heresy and devil worship, burned at stakes across Europe while their Grand Master, Jacques de Molay, cursed the Pope and the King of France from the flames. But that's just the surface story, the one written by victors who needed to justify their actions. The truth is darker and more complex, because when King Philip's soldiers broke down the doors of Templar strongholds, they found the treasuries empty. The gold had vanished, the sacred relics were gone, and most tellingly, the deepest chambers beneath their temples showed signs of recent excavation, as if something had been carefully removed and hidden elsewhere. Some say the surviving Templars fled to Scotland, to Portugal, to the New World. Others believe they simply melted back into the population, carrying their knowledge in whispered bloodlines that persist to this day. But the most disturbing theory is this: that they completed their mission. That somewhere in the centuries following their destruction, they found a way to break the seals that held Abaddon. That the Angel of the Abyss no longer waits in chains beneath Jerusalem, but walks free in our world, patient and invisible, gathering power for the final revelation. Look around you. Wars that seem to serve no earthly purpose. Wealth that flows in patterns that defy economic logic. Leaders who rise to power carrying knowledge they should never possess. Maybe these aren't accidents of history. Maybe they're the footprints of an angel whose true name means destroyer, whose keys unlock doors that were meant to stay closed until the end of time itself. The Knights Templar found something beneath the Temple Mount that changed them forever. The question that should keep you awake at night is this: what if they're not done with us yet?